I talk a lot about intuition, my own
Hmm.
intuition, and receiving what I call downloads of these profound inner knowings of mine that only make sense for me, or most of the time they only make sense for me, and then I'll say it to you, and you're like, "Oh, okay." And the other night you were reading Self-Reliance
Hmm.
by Emerson, and you've talked about this book before, and I haven't read it because you've warned me that it's very dense and the language isn't,
Hmm.
it's older language.
Yeah.
So I just, I was sitting on the couch with you. I wasn't doing anything. I said, do you want to read, a paragraph or two from the book just to see? So we read one paragraph, and then he gets to the second paragraph, and it was dense. I was able to follow along a little bit, but once he hit the second paragraph, the only thing that stuck out at me, it jumped out at me, was he used the word intuition and broke it up
Hmm.
in dash tuition, which we also love all to do all the time with words. Dis-ease, what are some other ones?
Um,
You inverse,
yep.
universe,
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that. Like there are so many. So when he said, when he was reading this, and I said, oh my gosh, we need to like dive into this. Like, what is the meaning of like tuition and the meaning of like in, and like what does it mean like all together with these?
Yeah. It's interesting. It is a word that gets thrown around a lot,
Yeah.
and I guess maybe not taken seriously, or
Yeah.
like, oh, it's like, trust your intuition. But like, I don't know, like we think of learning, and we think of like there's one way to get information and knowledge, and that's through learning. So I thought it was really, really interesting to look into the word, um, with the definition of tuition. Because I think when I hear tuition, the first thing I think of is like how much it costs to go to college, right?
Exactly. Yes. Or high school.
Yeah, or high school, yeah, private school, any
Yeah.
private school, like
Yeah.
what it costs to go to school.
Yeah.
And when I looked it up in whatever Webster's dictionary, that was the second definition, and the first was just literally like learning. Get it right down here. It was yeah, like a teaching or instruction. That was really, really interesting. First, that's the main thing where so we've kind of like lost. We don't use tuition that way, so that's
No.
why it's really interesting. I think to read stuff from like the 1800s where they use words differently. Um, but yeah, to start thinking of tuition, like, okay, like what is in? Because I also always think of when you think of like the prefix in, you think of it as being like in, like intention, invoke. Um, but
Yeah.
it's
Like,
also, so I was like, that's interesting. And then I looked at it, it's like, oh, I'd also never really thought of it being used to denote like opposite of, which it also is. Like insane is like the opposite of sane, or like the opposition to sane.
okay.
Yeah, so there's like, so intuition is like that. It's without learning or without instruction. So it's like there's these things that we know. We don't know where they come from. We can't really define it. But to know something without having to be taught or instructed is to like intuit it, or to use your intuition.
I
Yeah. And
I feel like it makes so much sense. Like
yes.
when you get those, like I'm going to call it an intuitive download, but it's like, yes, this makes sense. Like I almost struggled to explain it to you because I just understand
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah, it is a really interesting idea of like a knowing, where it's like
Yes.
not like, it's different than if somebody were to teach you something where they're like explaining and putting things together. But then you get these like moments where it's like in an instant you understand an entire concept.
Yes.
And it's like it's like these breakthrough moments where it's like you like your knowledge or like your wisdom takes like a leap forward, and it's really, really hard to explain to people. But now to think about like, oh, we do have a word for this, and it's very clear. Like intuition is the things that we know without being taught or instructed. It's just kind of like,
Oh, it's so
I
cool.
don't want to say like it validates the idea, but in a way it does, or like it helps to share what's going on, like intuition. Because for me, even the concept of intuition never really like made that much sense because we're literally like taught the opposite of that growing up. So yeah, I think it's really cool.
Yeah,
to,
it helps me think that I'm not like crazy and saying it's like, okay, yes. And it also, I do think validates a good word, especially for us and people who are, you know, on this wellness spiritual journey where we talk so much about like a higher self and inner knowing, like it's all within you. So it's like, yeah, I feel it, I hear it. It's like, but it's not a voice, it's just like a knowing. And so it's like, okay, like all of these things piece by piece are making more and more sense.
It's like this has existed for a long time because we've had a word for it for a long time. And it's like that word over time has kind of not lost its meaning, but like I feel like the way we use it colloquially or like in society, like we don't honor intuition in the same way tuition or like learning.
For sure.
So I think that's sort of like where that validation is like, yeah, obviously, like
I mean, your intuition is your guiding force.
Yes.
I do.
Yeah. It's
I know.
Like there's something that is guiding us and informing us and keeping us.
And I feel like we're just scratching the surface. It's about to get so deep.
Yeah. But yeah, this is what we mean when we talk about intuition.